We did not practice this. We also weren't late. We've been sitting in here for 30 minutes. So just so everyone knows, like, we have been here prepared. So I'm so excited to be here with Lynn. We actually, I think, putting this together was a little bit crazy because of the holiday season, but we had a chance to talk yesterday, and I hope she agrees. I thought the conversation was great. Mm-hmm. And so today we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to talk about leadership, because I thought it might be interesting to hear about her and how she's built some different teams and hear about her background. We'll talk a little bit about loyalty marketing at my Walgreens, and then talk a little bit about media. We'll see how it goes. Sound good?
Sounds good.
So first I thought we would start with, though, because it's after lunch, I think everyone's probably got a full belly. We're tired here. We haven't had our afternoon coffee. Let's do a little bit of rapid fire so we can learn a little bit more about you. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. Favorite food?
Really good French fries.
Favorite song?
Let's see here. What's on my playlist? Sinead O'Connor, Nothing Compares to You.
Huh? I wasn't expecting that, actually. Favorite drink?
So, for those of you that have ever been to Maui, there's a restaurant called Monkey Pod, and they have this really phenomenal Mai Tai that they make with this like homemade passion fruit cream.
Oh, sounds pretty good. Mm-hmm. It's dry January now. Sounds
right,
pretty good.
Exactly.
Okay, and last thing, if you could be any superhero, who would you be?
So Wonder Woman, but Linda Carter.
All right.
That version.
So one of the things as I was kind of doing some research on you and not finding out about your love of Sinead O'Connor was I was reading your bio on the Walgreens site. Mm-hmm. And actually I would encourage you to find Lynn's bio on the Walgreens site, because there's actually a very striking picture with your bio. That had me actually out there researching more, wondering why I didn't learn about this in history class. But you were talking about how you used to tell people you were from Minneapolis, mm-hmm. but that wasn't necessarily your full story. And so do you want to tell everyone a little bit about where you're from and your background?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I grew up in Minnesota. My family actually emigrated there when I was 4 years old. And so for like the majority of my life and the majority of my career, right, when people would ask you, like, where are you from? Like, tell me about yourself. I'd be like, I'm from Minnesota. And it was probably about when I was at Starbucks, I had the opportunity to do a town hall. And our CMO at the time had asked me, he's like, I would really, really love for, all of my leaders to kind of like share a little bit about yourself. And so I was like, okay, what am I going to talk about, right? That's kind of interesting and different. And so I made the decision to kind of talk about like my true origin. And so what I told the audience then was that so my family immigrated to Minnesota when I was 4. But what the story was before that was that we left Vietnam. So it was right kind of in the post part of the Vietnam War. And my family left on a boat. So we were, if you guys have ever heard the term boat people, we were boat people. So we, my parents, bought passage on this cargo ship, and it was an illegal operation. And so, we kind of snuck away in the night with whatever we had, and joined probably a couple thousand people on this cargo ship. And we had no idea where we were headed. And so we left, and we ended up in Hong Kong. And at the time, the Hong Kong government was dealing with a lot of refugees from lots of different Asian countries. And they had just made the decision to just stop accepting more refugees. So our cargo ship got stranded in Hong Kong harbor. And the government was refusing to do anything. And so my family, along with several thousand people, sat on this boat for probably 4 or 5 months. And finally, I think there was a group of men that were literally like, we just have to get off the boat, right? We don't have any food, we don't have any water. And so there's a group of men that swam for shore, my dad included, who couldn't swim. But that was really kind of the way that the government finally had to do something. And so we were in Hong Kong for about a year. And at the time, there was the United States had a huge effort to accept refugees. And so a lot of communities and churches were kind of got involved in this. And so we were lucky enough to get adopted by a Lutheran church in Minnesota. And so got on a plane, showed up in Minnesota, had no idea what snow was, had no idea what anything was. But this wonderful group of church parishioners who most of them had never seen actually an Asian person just really opened their arms. And at the time, it was my parents, and I had 3 sisters. My mom was pregnant with my fourth sister, and they just, helped us do everything, right? From find housing, get my parents enrolled in English, get us enrolled in school, help, take us to appointments, help us navigate the, sort of like public health and sort of just getting all of the social services set up. And so I think it took me a very long time to tell that story, right? Because I think the majority of my career was always about fitting in, right? It's like, I'm just going to blend in and be like everybody else. And I think after I told that story when I was at Starbucks, I just had so many people come up to me and just thank me for sharing it, right? Because I think it just allowed people to want to tell their story and be okay with it. And I think from my perspective as a leader, I think it just has, shaped who I am as a leader. It shapes how I show up. It really emphasized the importance of being vulnerable and empathetic, and really just focus on the notion of like building a community. Because I'm a product of that, right? And so I think if I can bring that to how I show up as a leader and how I interact with people at work, I think for me, it's just like I see sort of the impact and the results of that.
What do you think, and this wasn't necessarily something we talked about, but what do you think made you in that moment decide you were going to tell that full story?
That's a really great question. And I think as leaders, we I think underestimate sometimes how much people look up to us, and how much I think having somebody see themselves in you and what you do is important. And even now, I'm fortunate enough to have this wonderful role at Walgreens as CMO, and it still boggles my mind when I have Asian American team members come up, whether it's at Walgreens or other places, and they're just like, it's just amazing that I have somebody to look up to, right? Because I think about my career, and when I was sort of, all the different companies that I worked at, there weren't that many, leaders of color, right, in as a VP or above. And so I think for me, it was just like, I want to be able to just like tell my story and allow other people to, be authentic and show up as who they are, because I think there is value in everybody's story in terms of, how we partner, how we manage our businesses, like the results that we drive. I think ultimately, like we are a reflection of our customers, right? So I think being able to talk about who you are and what you do is really important.
Yeah, I think definitely in terms of even just like building culture with a team and building that trust with the people that work for you, I think showing up as your real self is really important. We talked about the word authentic.
We did.
And being authentic as a leader, which I know is one of the key things you think about. So actually, we talked about how at Yelp, it's one of our we have like 5 tenets or 5 principles, and it's one of our key values as well. But I think in some ways, like the word authentic has changed, like the meaning of it has changed in the last couple of years. And so talk to me a little bit about what that means to you and like why that word is so important, but how you've seen it change over the last couple of years.
No, I think that's a great question. And I think we talked a little bit about just how, I think from a leadership perspective, we talk about being authentic, we talk about being empathetic, and it's a little bit of a catch-22, right? Because I think sometimes, it's a balance, right? Because I think when you talk about being authentic, I think some people might, I don't want to say like twist the definition, right? But I think use it as a way to be like, okay, you know what? It's an excuse for my behavior. And so when I think about authenticity, I think it's really important to make sure that when you're expressing yourself and who you are, you also have to be mindful of others, right? So I think that element of it is really important. And I think for me, being authentic is, like you said, like being able to, talk about who I am, right? Talk about my culture, talk about the things that have influenced me. I think in the last couple of years, especially with COVID, I think when you talk about being authentic, there's a huge component around mental health, right? So just like how do you as leaders kind of, sort of be vulnerable in that space, but also like make sure that you're supporting and encouraging and recognizing your team members and sort of that element of authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think allowing people to have that space. I also think COVID gave us the opportunity to see inside like not only our employees' houses, but I think at Yelp, like in conversations with clients, I've noticed like I could see like their home in the background and like immediate form, like a little bit more of a connection just based on some of that. We do think though it strikes a little bit of a line between you want to encourage employees to be authentic, but we also want them to be representative of the brand.
That's very true. I would
Yes.
agree with that. Yeah.
So that's, definitely something to keep in mind. So just pivoting a little bit, one of the things you mentioned on our call was just the My Walgreens program, and you've had a lot of experience with loyalty.
Yeah.
How big is the My Walgreens program now?
So we're 102 million members, which is, I think, and I've worked for, some really fantastic brands that have great loyalty programs, but it's probably the largest that I've run.
And when you're thinking about that program and you're thinking about, you've been in this role about 8 months, 8 months now, and kind of building your team to be one that's going to continue to drive that loyalty and that growth. What are the type of things you're thinking about as you're looking for marketers to join your team?
So I always encourage my team to, when we think about the customer, we're thinking about driving loyalty engagement, it's really important to think about like, what's the customer problem that we're trying to solve? So I think whether you're in marketing or in any other role, probably in a corporate function, it's really it's really easy to get excited about the shiny red object, the innovation. But I think if you're not doing that through the lens of with a customer and like real problems or needs that you're trying to solve, it's very easy to go down the wrong path. And so I always encourage my team members. It's like you've got to kind of walk the shoes, right? So like when I we do things like go visit stores, right? Spend time talking to the operators, spend time understanding what their pain points are, right? Because, oftentimes it's like the basics, right? It's the basics of their job that they're trying to get right. And those are the components around customer experience and how you drive loyalty. I think loyalty is sometimes seen as a quick fix, right? It's seen as like, we'll just launch a loyalty program and we'll, drive comp or sales or whatever the number is. And I think unless you have the basics of a customer experience down and it's really seamless and really fantastic, creating a loyalty program on top of that is not going to be successful. And so that's why I always encourage my team members, like you really have to understand the customer, you have to understand the operator and what they're going through and making sure that you're kind of balancing the needs of both of those groups.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I work with some of Lynn's teammates, and actually they do in real conversations with me talk about like ordering things on the website, like seeing how long that process takes to really make sure they're understanding, because as we've talked about, marketing can't solve operational issues, those type of challenges.
That's very true.
So just pivoting a little bit, like talk to me about then, obviously My Walgreens, huge priority for you. What are some of the other pillars that you're thinking about right now in the CMO seat at Walgreens?
Yeah, so I think, we have made the recent expansion into healthcare. And so as we think about sort of repositioning our brand and our mission and our purpose and our values, right, to really be that leading provider in localized healthcare and well-being, there's work that we need to do, right, in terms of just making sure that we are showing up that way in terms of our customer experiences and how we go to market. So a lot of the work that we have in this upcoming year will be really focused on that in terms of, our go-to-market, our brand positioning, and just like our customer experiences and how we evolve that to really address that. The other piece that we have is within the healthcare environment, Walgreens has historically focused on really the B2C, right? So we've had, a lot of success in the retail side of the business. So now with our expansion into healthcare, we have this whole universe where we are engaging B2B. And so for us, it's really thinking through like, what is our differentiated value proposition in that as a partner? How do we think about all of the learnings that we've had on the B2C side in terms of, strategy and being consumer focused and being data driven? And how do we apply that to our B2B audience, our partners, in terms of just creating something that is more meaningful?
And so give us an example. I know I was trying to ask you about a bunch of examples of what that means. Give us an example of what that means, like for people who aren't necessarily as familiar with that space.
Yes. So one of the things that we have a partnership right now with a couple of different providers, but I'll talk about specifically in California. We have a partnership with Blue Cross Blue Shield of California. And so we've established this customer experience called a Walgreens Health Corner. So the intention is like if you go into California, I think it's about 100 stores now, you'll actually, we actually have a dedicated space in our Walgreens that's called a Walgreens Health Corner. And what we have partnered with Blue Cross Blue Shield on is that we actually have dedicated people in the store that are kind of walking the aisles. So they're either pharmacists or nurses or nurse practitioners. And the intention is that those folks in the Walgreens are meant to just really like help customers, right? So you might be coming in specifically, to fill a prescription, but you're going to go talk to the pharmacist at the prescription counter. But those medical professionals that are part of Walgreens Health Corner, they are there just to kind of, help our patients and our customers just kind of like, and, anything from a question about, like I'm thinking about, improving, sort of like my health. I want to take more vitamins. Like, what recommendations do you have off the shelf? They're helping them, kind of just think about testing, right, and looking at medical equipment and things like that. And so that's sort of like our foray into kind of like how do we think differently about creating a customer experience that meets a need? Because you don't necessarily want to go to a clinic setting to have a conversation with your provider because either maybe you don't have time or maybe you can't get an appointment. And so it's really around meeting the customers where they're at, being in their communities, and just making sure that we're creating a different point of access for them that we didn't have before.
And so is that initiative like part of like trying to drive the loyalty like through My Walgreens? Like, do you see those things as all tied together?
I think there's a huge opportunity for us to think about loyalty and engagement differently in healthcare. I think we all, as people, have had good and bad experiences, right, with healthcare. And so I think the way that I see it is that when you think about our loyalty program, we've had a tremendous amount of success, I think, in the retail space. And I think it's really about thinking about how we think about the entire customer journey, right? So like from the time that you're spending in your physician's office all the way through, whether you have to visit a hospital, but there's always an element of you're going to need to pick up a prescription and you're going to need to kind of do aftercare. So we want to be part of that entire journey. And I think with a program like My Walgreens, where we have, patient and customer information, we know your purchase history, all of those things, we have the opportunity to connect all those points for our customers and just to create a more seamless experience for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And even thinking about like how all those things tie together. Is there anything else like you're excited about like for this upcoming year? I know you had mentioned even like some brand work that you were going to be doing. Like what other things are on your mind?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for us, I think there is for me, I'm really excited about I think Walgreens, and I think our new mission and purpose. I think for me personally, if you kind of tie it back to my upbringing, just the ability to provide access and to provide equity and to, I think, provide support and guidance to our customers in the communities where they live is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I think our opportunity as a brand, based on our footprint, I think from our physical locations, but also our history, we have a 100+ year history of really focusing on well-being and healthcare. And so I think combining that with sort of like, the opportunity that we have, now I think with how customers and patients are feeling about, healthcare, and I think the access to healthcare, I think it's just like a perfect storm, right? In a very good way, right? In terms of the work that we can do at Walgreens to, I think, bring that together for both our customers, but also as well as our team members.
So in the spirit of leadership, I was having a conversation with one of someone on your team today, and she was talking about how she feels really excited to be working at Walgreens right now because she feels like the leadership coming in is like excited and moving faster, a little bit faster. And I think sometimes when you think of the healthcare industry, at least I know I'm trying to close a deal every now and then. It can take a very long time. Yeah. So how do you kind of balance the speed and with like regulation and things like that?
Yes. So I think that's very fair. I think especially when you're dealing in the healthcare, like there's there's legalities, there's HIPAA, there's a lot of things that we have to factor into it. And so I think what it comes down to is that, it's for me, how I navigate that space is like, it's really important to like make sure that you have those partnerships within the organization. And so I think it's always thinking about, again, the problem that we're trying to solve and how do we kind of innovate or ideate or think about things differently. And I think, I've had wonderful experiences at Walgreens with partners, I think across the board in terms of like, if we can kind of approach it that way, they will oftentimes come with like, their perspective on how we can move a little bit faster. But I think it is something that I think we all wrestle with, right? In terms of just, I think, especially in an environment where data privacy and compliance is really important.
All right, that's helpful for me to know. One last question, then I'll actually turn it to the audience because I'm sure they have some questions for you. just going back to this idea of being authentic, and creating a space for your employees to be able to have conversations with you. We talked a little bit about how you have like a stand-up meeting and someone kind of came to you about the matrix or the grid, and they were kind of giving you the top line of what that was. Yeah. And you were kind of pushing a little bit deeper to get the actual truth about what was going on, like on the ground level. Talk a little bit about that, because I think this was just an idea of encouraging an employee to be authentic and then rewarding that behavior. That was one of the things I took away from our conversation.
Yep. So one of the things that, Walgreens is we're going through an immense transformation. And so I think sometimes when you're going through transformation, it requires you as a leader to think really differently about how you're going to drive change management within your organization. And so one of the things that I've really, reiterated with my team is that within our organization and across the enterprise, it's really important for us to focus on outcomes. If we're only focusing on outputs, right, you're just focusing in your job, you're just focusing on checking the box and doing the thing that's within your area of responsibility, like that's not how we're going to really drive transformation and change. And so when you focus on outcomes, it forces you to be much more collaborative and actually kind of like see things through and problem solve across the board. And so in this specific situation, we were talking about a specific technology project, and it was falling behind in terms of its implementation date. And I got this like status sheet, and I was like, oh, everything is red, but there wasn't any explanation as to why. And so I just sat down with the team member. I said, give me the backstory. Like, tell me the honest truth, right? Like, give me the bad news. It's totally fine. And so, he kind of proceeded to tell me sort of all the reasons why things were red. And I said, okay, that's really, really helpful. I said, now you've kind of given me the information to be able to go in and have a more informed conversation with our cross-functional partners about what we can do. And I think it was the first time that when we got into a room as leaders, we actually talked about like we didn't focus so much on like the red, yellow, green. We focus more on like, okay, so how do we actually get beyond it, right? Like, what are the things that we need to fix or address to get to a green status? And so it was much more solutions oriented and more outcomes based. And we actually walked away from that meeting with a plan. But I think before that, it was just like we would show up for this meeting, people would give a report out, and we would leave. And so I think a couple things within that is like I think just demonstrating to my team that driving for the outcome is really important. But I think also as a leader, when I asked him for his perspective, his opinion, and then I took that input and actually did something with it and changed the direction of the project, it built a level of trust with him and I, because he's like, oh, okay, I gave you the feedback and I saw something change. So I think sometimes when we, from a leadership perspective, like we ask our teams for feedback, but they're not going to give you the bad news unless you give them reason. To know that you're going to do something with it, and you're going to help them, and you're going to empower them and help them to move things along.
Yeah, what was especially, I think sometimes it's hard to know when you can cross that line, like with your manager, and talk about like, okay, no, here's like the real deal of what's happening without it sounding like an excuse or whatever it is, right. And just be able to be open. But I specifically liked how in our conversation you talked about rewarding that authenticity by showing someone that you were doing something positive with it. And it's not like you were just trying to like find someone to point the finger at for what was actually going on.
Yeah, that's very true.
Well, maybe we can, if someone has a mic, maybe we can take a couple questions.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for this one. Thank you for sharing the story. I'm Mexican, born in Mexico.
Do you want to use, you know what, I can't hear you so well. Maybe use my mic.
You can share.
I won't repeat the Mexico stuff, so you guys will see me later. My question is about how are you approaching multicultural marketing? Because obviously from a healthcare perspective, I know that my culture sometimes struggles with their relationship with healthcare.
Yep.
So how are you guys approaching that as a brand?
Yeah. So I think it's really important. And I think the thing that we've learned is that I think, especially from a multicultural standpoint, it is incredibly important to really focus on the community. Right, so it's like, how do we make sure that we are? So it's less of, I think, a national go-to-market plan. It really is focusing on those communities and those localized partnerships, and where those communities already have trust. Who are those people that in the community that we trust, and how do we build those relationships and partnerships? And I think for us that is a very different approach than I think historically we've had as a brand. And if for us it's just like how we But what that means is it's not only a strategy change, it's also like how we think about the capabilities that we have on my team, the types of folks that we have on my team, and just bringing in a different level of expertise that we haven't had before.
Do you find them when you're looking for people, like you have like those certain things in mind to make sure you do have that representation across the team?
I think it's really important, right? Because I think just even especially, I think even in the Latin community, there's various, like somebody who is Cuban American is somebody who's different than very Mexican American. And so I think you do have to understand those nuances, and you do have to understand like, those mindsets and those behaviors and those, relationships that are really important. And that takes time, and oftentimes you need to have people on your team that understand that perspective. I mean, we certainly have really fantastic agency partners, but it's very different than having somebody in-house who really can kind of give us that guidance and that input.
Great.
Hi, Lynn. My name is Hugh. I'm Korean American. So you have such an impressive rewards program, and obviously there's good reasons for it in terms of like how you have done intentionally, gone and understood more about the problems that you're solving for your customers. And one of the struggles that we have is that a lot of our work, digital work, ends up being very much, okay, what are we going to do this year?
Mm-hmm.
And then whoever's in the room the next year
Yep.
says, okay, what are we going to do this year?
Yep.
Which looks completely different from the way in which we launch our physical products. Like diapers and Kleenex, it's there we have like a pipeline of like 5 years of what we're going to create.
Yeah.
So I guess it would be super interesting to hear your perspective on how do you get that kind of planning strategically in place so that each year you're not just like moving different directions and
Yep.
however the 10 people in the room are think is the best options at that time, and how do you create maybe even a pipeline and a strategy around that?
Yeah. So I would say that I think especially when it comes to the customer, when you're thinking about like loyalty and engagement, it cannot just be the job of marketing. The best organizations that I have worked for, it is an enterprise strategy. And it is something that everybody understands in the organization. And I think your job as a marketer, as a leader, is to get to understand and kind of create that talk track and that story for why they should care. So like a really great example is like when I was at Ulta Beauty. They have a fantastic loyalty program as well. But when we were talking about, how do we build advocacy and understanding of the program at the operator level, the work that we did was to is what I would consider like probably not things that we had thought about before, right? So it was things like, okay, so if we expect our operators and store managers to understand the value of the loyalty program, we got to talk their language. So we, created, dashboards and reporting that talked about how, at the store level, for every loyalty member that you get, this is the value to your business, right? Versus like a non-member. We did things like spend a lot of time just, creating real-time reporting for them so they could see like on a daily basis, like sort of the contribution of the program. But I think when you talk about it in the sense of like it being a strategic, an enterprise strategy, you're more apt to build something from a roadmap perspective, right? Versus like you said, kind of just like the shiny red object. And I think same thing as loyalty. I've worked for some brands before where it was like 1 year be like, oh, loyalty is everything. And then the next year, oh, we've got to cut back, right? So I think unless you kind of build that thinking and sort of that understanding in the organization about sort of the value across the enterprise, it's really easy to kind of fall into that trap.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have one last question, only time for one more.
All right, hopefully it'll be a good one. I'm Ben Jones with Pushly. I was just curious in terms of all of the, you have in-store, you have online, you've got loyalty, you're getting into healthcare, you've got a lot of things on the HIPAA side that you have to deal with. In terms of tying all that together, I'm assuming that, there's a CDP that you're using, but I'm just curious if there's if that's already figured out or if there's long ways to go on that front in terms of tying all the data points together and really understanding who your customer is so that you can communicate with them in an authentic way across all these different channels.
Yes, so we absolutely are looking at, I think, bringing that all together. So I think on the retail and pharmacy side, we have a pretty mature and a well-established, right, like CDP in terms of like who our customer is and how we engage them. I think the complexity that we're adding to our business is on the healthcare side, right? So whether through we are, acquiring a lot of new partners for us, right? So I think like thinking through like how we bring those partners into the ecosystem. But then I think to your point, like with the HIPAA piece, that's another layer of complexity, right? So that is something that we're really mindful of in terms of just how do we get consent to talk to our customers, right? And there's varying levels of sort of like consent that we can get, but it is something that I think, again, as a marketer, you're spending a lot of time talking to compliance and legal, just in terms of understanding what our opportunity is. But we're feeling really good, I think, in terms of the path that we're heading on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Lynn, thank you so much. This was one of my favorite panels I've done so far. Really enjoyed our conversations, and thank you so much for being
Thank
with
you,
Brand
Mandy.
Innovators.
Yeah, thank you.